Hey everybody, this is David coming to you from the Proof of Pod editing studio. Our interview with Noah Healy has been cut into three parts for your viewing pleasure. This is part two, where we talk about the non-cryptocurrency uses of blockchain technology. Please enjoy. What I really wanted to get to, now that we've laid some groundwork, so what are some promising, non-currency uses for blockchain?
Well, one of them is something that our government's been doing for quite some time now. A former Walmart executive has been working through the USDA, I believe, to get food um, uh, logistics chains all up on blockchains. Uh, and so, if you have a situation where the piece of fruit or the vegetable that you're eating at the restaurant or picked up out of the grocery store is tainted, they can find a non-reputable uh, history that goes all the way back to the dirt, and everybody that touched it between you know that and when it got to you. And so that allows for much more rapid localization and sort of research from a public health standpoint. And that, I mean, we'll see. The Elon and Trump are kind of taking a blowtorch to a lot of things right now. But this guy actually got started under the first Trump administration with the government. He'd been doing it uh, at Walmart. Um, After some kind of outbreak that they had a hard time with for close to a decade before then. And and I I haven't heard too much about it, which is mostly a good sign for that kind of infrastructure project.
So who's putting information into this blockchain? Is it farmers?
It comes, yeah, it's pretty much full spectrum. Um, so pickers can take pictures of a fruit or a vegetable or something else as they're pulling it out of the ground or off the tree. Um, they they can then sort of bundle those things up, and when they go on the truck to leave, they put that information on. And as it gateways through each logistic uh, kind of transfer, part of the protocol is to put the information on the chain.
How widespread is this in the United States or in the world or anywhere?
It's as far as I know global. It's we we eat a lot of the food that we grow, but we eat plenty of food that we don't grow, and uh, and it's coming out from other locations. There's also some uh, some sustainability movement farming that are looking at full life cycle, uh, sort of a stage up from organic, that are deploying similar kinds of chains in Eastern Europe uh, with the intention to fully track not just the history of the food, but also the all the inputs. So um, if you're selling with things with their zero impact stamp, you would have to account for the gasoline that was burned transporting it to like a factory that then made bread out of it, for example, and the other energy sources. So they're trying to map an even richer section of the economy.
So why wouldn't this data all just go into like a database set up by the federal government or something? Why try to use a blockchain?
The primary goal for the blockchain is essentially because there isn't necessarily trust. So the federal government isn't just operating inside the United States, it's also operating outside the United States, where it doesn't have the best reputation. We have a lot of food sources coming in from Central and South America, and there's different levels of amity that have existed through the decades and exist right now. And so by creating this independent data feed, because you need the participation of the end users. Tracking your supply chain up to your border when supply chains are global is kind of leaving out most of the important stuff. And so by having this independent object that can be used and trusted by third parties, that creates the incentive for them to actually provide the information as well. And that was the purpose.
So as a end user, as somebody who is buying a tomato, like, can I track where this tomato's been?
I believe you can actually. I've never bothered doing it myself, but the chain does. I'm pretty sure the chain does still exist, and it is public.
So my understanding of this is that it's actually been helpful when there are some kind of breakouts of E. coli or whatever, you
That's the
know.
primary purpose,
Huh.
is tracking where contamination entered the stream and to how disparate the space that the contamination would have reached, so that you can sort of very rapidly remove tainted foods and fix whatever caused them to become tainted in the first place.
I wasn't planning to say this, but if we weren't using a blockchain for this type of thing and it was being reported to some agency or whatever, there is the possibility that somebody in the agency screwed up in some way and then they would have an incentive to cover up their tracks, right?
That's one of the serious issues with bureaucracies, is that the people in the bureaucracy are incentivized to increase their rank within the bureaucracy, which you achieve by not having the bureaucracy discover that you have made mistakes. And the two ways to do that are to not make mistakes in the first place, or successfully cover up mistakes that you make.
Right.
And there's been a lot of studies. I actually have Parkinson's law on a shelf right behind me here. Um, but there is a tendency for those kinds of human organizations to become sclerotic. Once somebody has made a career out of covering up their mistakes, it's sort of easier for the next guy, and you get a larger and larger group that is hiding the truth rather than working with it.
Right. So the thing that I didn't plan on addressing, but there is kind of like this story in the news a lot right now in the last few years where the COVID virus may have come from a lab, and like it's possible if we were tracking these kind of things on a blockchain, we would know, you know, like for instance, let's just say, okay, I don't know the answer, but let's just say the Wuhan lab did develop the COVID-19 virus, right? They could have put onto the blockchain, a DNA marker or the hash of a DNA marker to say like this is what we're working on, like just as a matter of course. And then once the virus escaped, everyone would be able to look at it and say, "Oh, I see that this DNA marker that's out in the wild matches the hash of the DNA marker that you put on the blockchain, so we know it came from your lab." Whereas if they were, as a matter of course, putting all their viruses on the blockchain ahead of doing any work with it, then they would have a lot more plausible deniability to say, if it was one of our viruses, you would see it on the blockchain because we put everything that we do on the blockchain. Does that
Uh,
sound at all feasible?
yeah, yeah, and that gets into one of the other potential applications that Elon Musk has been floating. I don't really regard him as a particular expert on blockchain, but he's been talking about using the Doge thing to put government spending on blockchain, so they would have those kinds of traits. If some government department was engaging in fraud or waste or abuse or whatever, then you'd be able to sort of go back and take a look at their blockchain records and either say, you don't have them, and that's suspicious. This is similar to things like body cams for cops,
Hmm.
where
Right.
body cams have in fact mostly affirmed that police officers are professional and kind of doing the job for which they were trained. But there are notable exceptions where Either the footage doesn't exist when it should, or the footage does exist and this person never should have gotten a badge in the first place. And in those cases, you're happy to have that kind of a backup. So it's
Yeah,
kind of a who will watch the watchers type of thing. Um, I'm pretty sure that the motive for this, like I said, was to get cooperation from people who wouldn't necessarily trust the U.S. government, uh, to put information into the system in ways that the U.S. government would not then be able to manipulate and say, oh, it was the unlettered truck driver in a different country, not my, not the factory in my constituency that caused this problem to happen.
right.
Uh,
So yeah, I had federal expenditures as one of the items on my list too. Let's go back to the body cams for a sec. Now, first of all, I don't think I agree with your characterization that it's mostly affirmed that police are doing what we expect them to do, but that's pretty subjective. But let us say, just off the top of my head, that at the end of every shift, a police officer, takes off his body cam, or it'd be even better if it was like remote, but let's just say takes off his body cam, he puts it into attaches it to a system. The video for that shift is uploaded into a server, which is private, okay? But the hash of that video is put into a public blockchain. Now, the video is private, so nobody could watch the video. But if there was a question about what happened during that shift, the police department could release that entire video for that shift and be cryptographically, the public could be cryptographically assured that that is exactly the video that was taken. Does that sound about right?
yeah, yeah, that again to the limitations of the eventual breakdown of the hashing.
Right.
That's kind of the entire point of these cryptographic non-reputability concepts. And again, a blockchain creates this thing that nobody can erase things from.
Yeah, it's pretty clever. I hadn't thought of that before. Of course, a problem with what I just described is that the police would have to release the entire shift video, basically unredacted, not basically unredacted, but unredacted, in order for that hash to be a proof that it was the real thing. It could be
So
even,
that is true, but again, there are approaches that can solve that problem. So uh, you could you could have a breakdown where you would hash the full video, but also hash uh, various pieces of the video,
yeah,
um, and essentially uh, have an algorithm that divided up the video appropriately so that you would be able to pretty much cut and paste anything you wanted to, and then hash all of those things. Again, all this stuff is just increasing overhead, but there are technical approaches to cope with these issues, and and yeah, that's a approachable problem at the very
right.
least. But again, it relies on the people who are operating our systems to be aware of these technical possibilities and to debate the cost and benefits of them. And right now, uh, there are very few people who, in fact, uh, are even aware that the math exists, much less able to reason productively about it.
All right, so let's get a little bit more into the math here. So if you hash something, it doesn't really matter how big or how small it is, right? If it's a 8 hour video or a 1 minute video or a two-page document, it's using whatever algorithm, it comes out with a hash that's the same length in terms of bits, right?
Correct. Yes.
I think the Bitcoin hash is called 256 because it comes out with a 256
256 bits. Yes.
bits. Yeah. So the cost uh, of computationally of hashing an 8 hour video and putting on a blockchain, 256 bit. So what is that, like 32 characters,
Yeah, roughly.
32 8-bit characters,
Yeah.
um, is actually like really small, right?
Yeah. And again, like I said, if you had some basic algorithm that divvied the thing up into all the various subsections that it could have, and then hashed all of them in order, you could then hash the that sequence of hashes, and and because that entire thing would be algorithmically generated, the amount of space you'd be using up on the blockchain would be quite small.
So we said something like what did you say, 32 bytes. So if you divided a 8-hour video, always tell me not to do any math on stream. But if we did 32 bytes per hash, you could do your whole shift in 32 bytes, or you could do an 8-hour shift in hour-long segments for 256 bytes. And you could break it down further into every minute being its own hash for 15 kilobytes, roughly.
Right. But if you had a algorithm that determined what that 15 kilobyte file would be, you could hash that file
Mhm.
and get your 8 bytes back again,
Mm.
or your 32 bytes back again.
Yeah, right. So you have one hash for each minute of the police video, which winds up being times 480, I think, hashes. But you can hash those 480 hashes into a single hash, publish that single hash on the blockchain, and then if it ever
Right.
comes up, you could say, okay, well, this hash represents these 480 hashes, and in
Yeah.
those 480 hashes are these three hashes that are in question, and we know that like we computationally could not have like faked these hashes. So we know that these 3 minutes of video that we're about to release to you are the exact video that was recorded at that time.
And again, critically, not we know,
Yeah,
you can verify
right,
that the
right,
3 minutes that we are releasing are the 3 minutes that we recorded back then and created this chain of custody
right.
for.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I hadn't even thought of that before. So that's kind of like a lot of the non-currency or non-mainstream applications that we talked about at the beginning, a lot of them come down to documents, the ones that I was listing. Just to list some of the thoughts that I had real quick. You could have censorship resistant um, communications. I thought about this when there was like some Hong Kong protests, and the Chinese government, from what I understand, tightly controls communications, internet, and stuff like that. You might be able to use a blockchain to get around some censorship problems because if you can publish it once, it can then remain immutably in the blockchain where the Chinese government, whoever, can't destroy it.
Yeah, it would be significantly more difficult to remove something from a blockchain. You would essentially have to do something like the Ethereum fork we were talking about before, where you have to convince everybody to go to an earlier version of the chain and work forward from that and to ignore the later chain. So
Right.
the the sort of the bigger and the longer something that people didn't want to be there was there, the more disruptive it would be to remove it.
Yeah. If you had a document that you maybe wanted to patent or you wanted to share with some people, and you could have them sign an NDA or whatever, but you don't necessarily trust them, you can hash that document, put it on a blockchain, and then you can cryptographically prove that you created this version of the document at the time that you say that you did.
Yeah. Time priority is something that's interesting, and can have applications in a number of different fields, including patents, which is something that I'm currently balled up in.
That's something you and I talked about previously,
Right.
FYI
Yeah.
to the audience. I thought like car repairs could go on a blockchain, right? Like whenever I get a car repair, like put the receipt in the glove box, just because like maybe in the future somebody who buys that car from me will look through it and say, "Oh yeah, I see that he changed his oil regularly." But in theory, like we could have the car repair place like put into a blockchain that he had his oil changed, has brake service and whatever, and then I wouldn't have to keep track of the piece of paper is to me the big benefit.
Yeah, well, again, that's an interesting point because to some extent there already is a system that works like that. So, the dealerships and the insurance companies track VIN numbers and keep track of things associated with those VIN numbers. And so, major wrecks, you can get the car report and find out about the history of the car. And again, that's not on a blockchain. But if it were on a blockchain, there 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 could be a similar kind of activity. You could imagine one of the issues with car repair shops is reputation. There's some advantages to ripping off your customers.
Mhm.
Um, if a social movement to provide a car repair blockchain uh, a la the kinds of systems that we're using with the food, you
Right,
would be able to much more easily find and sort of localize car repair shops that had decided to become less reputable, uh,
right,
and uh, and again have more information about the cars. Now, all swords have double edges on all these things.
right,
The uh, the insurance companies are pretty much already so more informed about your life than you are that they're taking every opportunity to kind of push you over a barrel. And
right,
so creating richer public information access is would probably need to be accompanied by some approach to curtail that industry simultaneously,
right,
or they would simply collect all of the gains one way or another.
right. Another thought I had is like your work records or accolades, like resumes, whether you're in the hiring business or you're putting together a resume, it's very like outdated. But like if you have on your resume, like I did such and such at this company, and I was the highest producing whatever, you know, the company that you're applying to, if they call it a company that you worked for, the company that you worked for has some serious incentives to not contradict you and just be like, oh, we can't say whether or not he was the highest producing, you know, widget maker. Um, I mean, like I'll hear stories and it's like the resume will have a bald-faced lie on it. They'll call the old company, and the old company will be kind of like with a wink and a nod, be kind of like, "Oh, we can't dispute what he's saying there, but who knows what actually happened, and it's like in the tone of voice because they don't want this guy to get away with, a bald-faced lie, but they also don't want to like contradict, they put themselves out there in any kind of legally liable way.
Right. Well, that gets into, issues that exist kind of independently of the technology,
Right,
and whether or not you can have a culture that is kind of willing to call a spade, or everyone just has to live in fear. I had an incident, my third job out of college. Uh, I was doing sysadmin work for a biology lab and I was sort of loaned out to a colleague of my primary investigator's biology lab. They had had a sysadmin working over there, and he absolutely destroyed their entire RAID array by overwriting the master block with a tar file of his home directory, which
okay.
was being backed up by the university already and checkpointed. So it was completely unnecessary for him to do that backup.
Uh-huh.
And it was the most destructive. He had essentially created a tar file and then either DD'd or catted it onto the bits of the hard drive platter, overwriting the primary RAID. And so they lost many, many gigabytes of data back in like 2003 when gigabytes were still large amounts of data.
Right.
And they fired him, and they didn't give him a recommendation, and that was it.
Right.
They didn't like stamp on his forehead, never give him access to a command line that can operate your system.
Right.
They were just like, you can't work here anymore, but good luck finding some other place to work.
Right. Like at certain times and places, if you committed manslaughter, instead of going to prison, you'd like get branded.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that kind of thing, it is the Wild West. We don't have a good way to cope with, particularly now. I can generate very impressive resumes in a quarter of a second using
Right.
open source AI systems that will happily lie on my behalf about all the impressive things I've done.
Right. So just to like envision a positive use, like if you like are a sales associate and you win the quarterly, top sales associate or whatever, your current company could put that on the blockchain. And then like when you go looking for another job, like it would be verifiable that yes, like, company X said you were the top sales associate for this quarter, and company Y can check that for themselves without having to implicate company X in any way.
So what you're getting into there is effectively a social credit score, and the principal
Yeah,
problem with
right.
social credit scores is reciprocity. And so
Right, right, right.
for me, the if this is a good idea, the people that need to engage in it first are like the Forbes 500. The world's billionaires all need to be on the blockchain with what their achievements and so on are in a public place. The leaders of various countries, um, and we'll see. Is it a good thing to have a social credit score for a president of the United States, or does it make their lives a living hell and they kill themselves out of horror at living at a panopticon? Um, I'm willing to run that experiment with presidents of the United States and billionaires. We don't lose anything if it turns out that it's bad.
Thanks for watching part two of this three-part interview. Please check out part three, where we talk about blockchain dystopia, disasters, and forks.